The house wasn't empty. I had been living in the house for just under a year when it happened. I was 24, fresh out of college, and finally making enough money to afford a place of my own. It wasn't big or flashy, but it was mine. Quiet street. Normal neighbors. Nothing about it suggested danger. If there was one unusual feature, it was the basement. It was massive, far larger than anything I'd ever had before. The previous owners had split it into sections using unfinished plywood walls and exposed studs. Instead of one open space, it felt like a collection of half-finished rooms stitched together. At the bottom of the stairs was an open area, then a laundry section off to the left, a workshop space I never used, and a back storage room that always felt wrong. The layout had a strange effect. No matter where you stood, there were blind spots. Corners you couldn't see past. Spaces that felt disconnected from the rest of the basement. When I first toured the house, I thought it was kind of cool, like a secret maze hidden under the floor. I didn't spend much time down there. Mostly storage. Holiday decorations. Old furniture. The only regular reason I went down was to do laundry. That night was a weeknight, nothing special. I grabbed my laundry basket and headed for the basement door without much thought. That's when I noticed the lights were already on. It gave me a brief pause. I was certain I'd turned them off the last time I was down there. Still, I brushed it off. I figured I'd just forgotten. The basement lights were old, and weak anyway. Yellow bulbs that barely pushed back the shadows. I started down the stairs. Halfway down, I felt something shift, not physically but mentally. The air felt heavier, like the basement was holding its breath. I reached the bottom step and turned toward the laundry area. That's when I saw movement. Just a flicker at the edge of my vision. I turned my head without thinking and froze. There was a man crouched behind one of the folding tables near the far corner of the basement. He was low to the ground, partially hidden, but not enough. Our eyes met instantly. My brain refused to process it. This wasn't a shadow. This wasn't a trick of the light. There was a stranger in my basement. He stared at me with a flat, unreadable expression. His hair was matted. His clothes were filthy, like he'd been sleeping somewhere he shouldn't. He looked less like a burglar and more like someone who had been there for a while. We didn't move. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then, without warning, he stood up and ran.
Not toward me.
Deeper into the basement. That snapped me out of it. My body finally reacted, and I started backing toward the stairs. I didn't take my eyes off the darkness ahead of me. I didn't make it far. The lights went out. All of them. Instantly. The basement plunged into complete darkness.
Not dim.
Not shadowed. Absolute black. I'd never been down there without the lights on. I hadn't realized how disorienting it would be. I couldn't see my hands in front of my face. I panicked. I assumed I knew the layout well enough to make it back to the stairs, so I kept moving. One step, then another. My foot hit something, maybe a box, maybe the edge of a table, and I went down hard. The laundry basket flew out of my hands. My shoulder slammed into the concrete floor. By the time I pushed myself up, I had no idea where I was. My phone was upstairs. No flashlight. No light source at all. Fear flooded in fast and overwhelming. I started screaming. It wasn't a plan. It was instinct. I screamed as loud as I could, hoping the noise would scare him away. Instead, someone screamed back. From somewhere else in the basement. It was louder than mine. Rougher. Unhinged. The sound cut through me like ice. I stopped screaming immediately.
So did he.
The silence that followed was unbearable. I forced myself to move, reaching out and dragging my hands along the walls, shelves, anything solid. Every step felt wrong. Every sound I made felt too loud. Then I heard movement behind me. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. He was moving through the darkness like he knew exactly where he was going. That realization terrified me more than anything else. I could hear his breathing now. Close. Too close. I thought he was going to catch me. Then my hand hit wood. The staircase. Relief nearly knocked the breath out of me. I grabbed the railing and lunged forward, taking the steps two at a time. Something grabbed my ankle. I fell backward. My head struck the railing as I went down, pain exploding through my skull. Hands wrapped around my leg and started dragging me away from the stairs. He was strong. Stronger than I expected. I kicked wildly, panic fueling every movement. My heel connected with something solid, and his grip loosened just enough. I twisted. Pulled free. I ran. He screamed behind me, furious, but I didn't look back. I found the stairs again, and climbed as fast as I could. I burst through the basement door and slammed it shut. There was no lock. I threw my weight against it just as something slammed into the other side. The door bowed inward.
Once. Twice.
My socks slipped on the floor. I kicked them off for traction and pushed harder than I ever had in my life. After several brutal impacts, it stopped. Footsteps retreated down the stairs. I didn't move until I was sure he was gone. Then I grabbed my phone and called the police. By the time they arrived, the basement was empty. One of the windows had been forced open. Nothing was stolen. An officer suggested the man may have been living down there. That thought still makes my stomach turn. I moved out 4 months later. Looking back, I know one thing for certain. That man wasn't surprised to see me. He was waiting. The night of tapping. It had been years since the first time I really feared the basement. Yet, certain nights had a way of dragging those memories back like shadows stretching across a wall. I was 14, then on my own for a weekend. My parents had to drive out of state for a wedding and, to ease their minds, they had arranged for my older sister to stay with me. Or at least, that had been the plan. Within an hour of their leaving, she texted that she wouldn't be coming. She had a party. I didn't bother telling my parents. The house was in a safe, suburban neighborhood. Everything seemed normal. I had the whole place to myself, my first real taste of freedom. I thought I'd spend it playing video games, eating snacks, and watching movies I'd been banned from during the week. It was perfect. Until midnight. The tapping started faintly at first. I was lounging on the couch, controller in hand, when a barely audible tap-tap-tap reached my ears. My first thought was the siding. A branch, maybe. I froze, listening, convinced my imagination was exaggerating it. The tapping stopped. I exhaled. Probably nothing. I resumed my game. Then it started again, but this time the rhythm had changed. A purposeful, deliberate tap-tap-tap. It moved along the side of the house, from one window to the next. I felt my stomach tighten. It didn't sound like a branch. It sounded alive. Watching me.
Thinking about me.
I muted the TV, sitting perfectly still, staring at the shadows cast by the streetlights. Silence followed. I tried to tell myself it was an animal, or the wind, a raccoon, maybe a stray cat. But it didn't feel like that. It felt personal. Then a new sound came from below. From the basement. It was faint at first, just a subtle scritch through the wooden floorboards, but enough to make the hair on my neck stand on end. I tried to dismiss it. The basement had a kitchenette, storage rooms, and old shelves. I had often imagined rats in the dark, but this didn't feel random. This felt like someone or something was moving down there on purpose. I muted the TV again, forcing myself to stand. My legs felt heavy, almost frozen with fear. Every instinct screamed to stay put, but I needed to know. I needed to see. Slowly, I crept to the top of the basement stairs. The door had a small crack, and through it, I could just make out the faint outline of the floor below. The tapping was louder now, every few seconds, deliberate, controlled. I called out, "Hello?" My voice cracked, echoing slightly off the concrete. Silence. Then something shifted. The tapping stopped. I swallowed hard. That pause didn't comfort me. It terrified me. Whatever or whoever it was, it heard me. I couldn't turn on the lights. Not without going down. Not without risking what I couldn't even define. So I did the next best thing. I slipped my phone through the crack in the door, flashlight on, and recorded a few seconds of the basement in the dim glow. My hand shook violently. The moment I saw the screen, I almost dropped the phone. There it was. A figure, standing still, just beneath one of the small basement windows. I froze. My stomach twisted. The shadows didn't help. But it was real. Someone had been down there all along. I screamed, loud and high-pitched, more from shock than strategy, and ran to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. My hands trembled as I dialed my dad's number. I could barely speak, but managed to tell him what I saw. Within minutes, the police were on their way. While I waited, the tapping turned into pounding. Heavy, deliberate hits against the basement door, like fists trying to break through. My chest pounded. I could hear the intruder moving through the space, trying doors, peeking into corners. I pressed myself against my bedroom door, heart racing, too terrified to move. When the police arrived, they found the basement empty. Windows intact, doors locked, nothing out of place. Nothing to suggest how someone could have entered or disappeared. But I knew what I had seen. I had a video to prove it, a blurry image of a figure I couldn't identify. It was enough for the authorities to take the incident seriously, but the fear, the knowledge that someone had been inside my home, stayed with me long after the lights were back on. Even as a kid, I knew the basement had secrets. Shadows that moved differently. Corners that hid things. It wasn't just a room. It was a labyrinth. And that night, I realized someone or something had been navigating it without hesitation, confident, familiar, unafraid. From that weekend on, I never underestimated the quiet corners of the house. The basement was no longer just a room. It was a warning. And I would never, ever be alone there again. The basement stalker. By the time I turned 16, I thought I had a handle on the fear basements inspired in me. I had grown up in that house, after all. Every creak, every shadow, every weird corner had been cataloged in my mind. Or so I thought. Friday night, like most Fridays, the basement was my domain. My parents preferred the upstairs living room, leaving me free to hang out down below. It was a large space, finished with a sectional couch, a TV, and a few storage rooms tucked in the back. My cat, Rocky, usually kept me company. But that night, I assumed he was asleep somewhere in the rear of the basement, an assumption that would soon prove dangerously wrong. I had invited a friend, Meline, over. It was past my parents' usual bedtime for Rocky, so I didn't think twice when I heard a rustling sound from one of the storage rooms. It was faint, a soft movement, just like my cat might make. I explained it to Meline, and we carried on, pretending nothing was amiss. Minutes passed. Another rustle. Then a soft thud. Meline flinched each time, but I kept reassuring her. It had to be Rocky. My mind clung to that comforting lie. And then it happened. Scratching. Coming from the door at the top of the basement stairs. My stomach dropped. That was Rocky trying to enter. He wasn't already down there, which meant that every noise we'd just heard wasn't him. I didn't say anything, not at first. But Meline, sitting next to me, suddenly screamed. She pointed behind me. I turned. A foam football rolled across the floor, thrown from the darkness of a storage room. My heart froze. Someone was back there. I didn't see the figure clearly. The room was too dark. But there was no mistake. There had been a person in the basement, moving silently among the shadows, unnoticed until now. Panic replaced every rational thought. I grabbed Meline and practically dragged her up the stairs. The door slammed behind us, the sound echoing through the house. Chaos erupted. Meline was crying. I was shaking, overwhelmed by adrenaline and fear. My parents arrived soon after, and I led them to the basement door, explaining what had happened. They called the police immediately. I kept watch from the back deck, eyes locked on the garage entrance to make sure the intruder didn't escape. When the police arrived, they searched thoroughly. Every corner, every storage room, the garage empty. No signs of forced entry, all windows locked from the inside. One officer suggested the intruder had left through the garage before they arrived. I shook my head. Impossible. I had been watching it the whole time. Nothing came of it. No arrests. No explanation. But the basement, the once familiar place of comfort, had become a labyrinth of fear. Every shadow, every creak, every step reminded me that someone had been there. Someone who knew the space better than I did. Over the years, the memory of that night never faded. It became one of those moments that shaped my instincts, my caution. I never left doors unlocked, never ignored strange noises, and never assumed the basement was just a harmless room again. It had secrets, and some of them were meant to stay hidden, whether by my own fear or by something far more sinister that had once stalked me in the dark. Even after the police left and the immediate threat seemed gone, the basement haunted me. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something had been watching, waiting for the perfect moment. That night changed the way I moved through my own house. I started noticing small, subtle things that hadn't mattered before. A box slightly out of place, a shadow that didn't belong, the sound of footsteps echoing just a second too late. Every creak of the floorboards became a warning. I stopped going down there alone after dark. When I had to, I carried a flashlight and kept my phone in hand. Even years later, when I moved into my own apartment, that fear lingered. I realized that fear wasn't just about the basement, it was about the unknown, about someone invading a space I thought was mine. It taught me to respect my surroundings, to trust my instincts, and to never take safety for granted. But the thing that haunted me most wasn't the intruder itself. It was the thought that someone could live in the shadows, unseen, for so long. The idea that a stranger could know the basement better than I did, know where to hide, where to wait, where to strike, it changed my perception of safety entirely. I eventually moved on, mostly. I learned to laugh at myself when I realized how scared I'd been. But when I think about basements, I still feel that twinge of unease. Every dark corner reminds me of that night. Every unexplained noise triggers a memory of fear and uncertainty. The basement wasn't just a room. It was a lesson in vigilance, a reminder that some dangers hide where you least expect them, and that some questions, like how someone could vanish without a trace, might never be answered. Shadows in the basement. The house had been quiet for days, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears and makes every small sound echo like a warning. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. After all, months had passed since that terrifying night, and nothing had happened. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something in the basement was watching me. It started with small things. Items I was certain I'd left in one place would be slightly moved when I went downstairs. A chair shifted an inch. A box tipped over. At first, I chalked it up to fatigue or forgetfulness, but the feeling of being observed persisted. One evening, I had to go into the basement to retrieve some old boxes of winter clothes. My heart pounded as I descended the stairs, the dim light flickering from the old bulb above. I paused at the bottom, listening. Silence. Too perfect. The basement had always had a maze-like quality, but now it felt alive. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls. The plywood partitions seemed taller, more imposing. I edged toward the first storage room, my hand brushing against the wall for guidance. That's when I heard it, a soft, deliberate tap from the far back corner. I froze. Not a tap like a falling object, but a tap that echoed with intention, a rhythm that suggested someone, or something, was there. My mind raced. Maybe it was an intruder. Maybe it was that same man from months ago, returned.
But why?
And how had he gotten in again? Summoning every ounce of courage, I flicked on the flashlight app on my phone. The beam sliced through the darkness, illuminating the familiar clutter and storage boxes. Everything seemed normal until the light caught the edge of a shadow behind the workbench. I yelped and stepped back, almost tripping over a box. The shadow didn't move like a human. It shifted unnaturally, elongated, as if it were stretching toward me. My pulse skyrocketed, and I realized I couldn't see a face, only the outline of someone crouched, watching. The fear surged through me like ice water. I tried to speak, to demand who was there, but my voice caught in my throat. The shadow started moving, slow, deliberate steps along the floor. I stumbled backward, tripping over the laundry basket I had almost forgotten. Then came the sound that froze me entirely, the slow, dragging scrape of something heavy against the concrete floor, coming closer. Not footsteps, something heavier, stronger. My mind flashed to that night months ago, when the man had dragged me toward the stairs with what felt like inhuman strength. I bolted. Sprinting through the maze of the basement, I barely recognized the layout in the dark. The flashlight beam bounced wildly, casting grotesque shapes on the walls. The dragging noise followed, growing louder, closer, and somehow more purposeful. I reached the bottom of the stairwell and lunged for the railing. My fingers barely wrapped around the wood before a hand, or something like a hand, clamped down on my ankle, pulling me back. The basement floor rushed up to meet me as I hit it hard. Pain shot through my head, but adrenaline pushed me forward. I twisted, kicking wildly, connecting with the thing, and it released me. I didn't stop. I ran straight up the stairs, heart hammering, lungs burning, until I slammed the basement door shut behind me. Pressing my weight against it, I listened. Silence. For a few terrifying seconds, I dared to hope I had escaped again. But the basement wasn't quiet for long. From the other side of the door came a slow, methodical scratching, like fingernails raking across wood. It wasn't frantic, it was deliberate. Someone or something was testing the door, calculating the best way to get through. I scrambled to the counter to grab my phone, hands shaking violently. Calling the police felt redundant, but necessary. As I dialed, I caught movement in the corner of my eye. The shadows in the room seemed to pulse, almost breathing, as though the darkness itself were alive. 911. What's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was calm, but I could barely form words. Someone's in my basement. I can't. My words tumbled over each other. The scratching stopped. Then a single heavy thump against the door. My stomach dropped. My eyes darted to the basement window, locked. There was no escape. No one had entered. No one could have. And yet I knew, without question, that something had been down there, and it wasn't gone. I pressed my back against the door, holding the line with the dispatcher, and waited. Every nerve screamed. Every muscle tensed. Somewhere beneath me, the basement breathed, and I realized with a sinking dread, it had been waiting. Waiting for the right moment to strike again. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house, every flicker of light, made me jump. And somewhere in the distance, the basement waited. Shadows shifting, alive with intent, biding their time. I understood now. The basement had never been just a room. It was a trap.
And I was still inside it,